Hey everyone! You only need to learn 3 settings to be able to shoot in manual mode, which is shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Today, I'm going to share with you an easy step-by-step guide on how to choose the right camera settings when you're doing portrait photography outdoors with natural light. And I also have some new real-world examples to show you how I change my settings during a portrait photo shoot in a few different lighting scenarios and also with some camera and lens limitations as well. For example, I like to use lenses with fast apertures such as 35mm f1.4. So if you want to achieve this dreamy style of photo, I'll show you how to change your settings for that. But if you have a kit lens or you want to shoot images that are sharper, or you have a lens that doesn't have such a fast aperture, so something like f2.8 or a 5.6, then I'm also going to show you how to change your settings for that as well. So there are 3 main controls you can use to adjust the exposure and look of your photo, which is the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Together, these 3 settings are called the exposure triangle, which I'm sure you've heard of before. But basically, these settings control how much light reaches the camera's sensor, so they determine how bright or dark your photos are. Not only do they control exposure, but each of these settings have a creative effect on your photos as well. So let's take a look at all of them. Shutter speed is the length of time a camera shutter is open to expose light into the sensor. Shutter speed is measured in fractions of a second, like 1/1000th, 1/60th, and can even go as slow as 1 second or more. So this measurement refers to how long the shutter is open for. If you're using it at 1 second, that means the shutter is open for an entire second. If you use a fast shutter speed, something like 1/1000th, you are able to freeze fast-moving subjects like this. I make sure my shutter speed is fast when taking photos of people moving around or for sports or wildlife photography. If you use a slow shutter speed, so something like 1/60 or 1/30, this will start to cause motion blur in your images. This can be used creatively, so I like to do panning shots of cars to show that movement. You can also use it to smooth moving water, and I also find it really fun to capture a few slow shutter shots of people walking around. The next one we have is aperture, which controls the amount of light that passes through a lens and also affects the depth of field in your photos. Aperture is measured in f-stops, which is this number right here on the lens. So you'll usually see f-stops like f1.2, f2.8, f5.6, and so on. A lower f-stop number of f1.2 means you have a larger aperture, which lets more light and creates a shallow depth of field. I use larger apertures a lot in my photography as I love capturing dreamy looking images like this with lots of bokeh. A high f-stop number like f5.6 means it's a smaller aperture and lets in less light and increases the depth of field. Yeah, I agree. It's really confusing that the numbers are backwards, so smaller is bigger, bigger is smaller. I ended up making this graphic right here that shows you the f-stop number and how it affects light and depth of field. I also have an entire video doing a deep dive into everything you need to know about aperture, so if you're interested in learning more about that, I'll leave that video linked in the description for you. Finally, we have ISO, which is the sensitivity of the camera's sensor to light. A low ISO, like ISO 100 or ISO 200, means the sensor is less sensitive to light. You would use a low ISO in locations where you have plenty of light to work with. Using a low ISO also keeps your images clean and sharp. A high ISO, so something like ISO 4000 or ISO 6400, means the sensor is more sensitive to light. You would use a high ISO when shooting in low light conditions. Something to keep in mind though is typically the higher you go in ISO, the more grain and noise you'll see in your photos. You will also start to lose some detail and sharpness in your images because of this. So those are the 3 settings you need to know about. Now let's see how they all work together. But before we head out on location to show you how to do this in real time, I do want to mention that it is totally fine if you want to shoot in aperture priority, shutter priority, or even full auto mode with your camera. There is nothing wrong with that. But I do think it is extremely important to at least practice for a while to understand how manual mode works. The reason for this is that while auto and semi-automatic modes in your camera can produce some great results and are good to use sometimes to speed up your workflow, if you ever come across a situation where your photos are not working for some reason, if you have this knowledge about how all your camera settings work, you can quickly and easily change your camera settings to be able to capture that specific shot. You can also keep an eye on your auto settings while you're shooting to make sure nothing crazy is happening to your settings. The reasons I like to shoot in manual mode though are because A, it's really fun, I enjoy changing my settings, and while it may seem daunting at first, with some practice, you'll know what camera settings to use without even thinking about it. And B, I like all my photos to be consistent. So with auto mode, sometimes your settings might jump around a little bit, but in manual mode, I keep them all the same for a set of photos, which makes it easier for me to edit later on. Anyway, let's go to our photo shoot. So I have my camera set up here and I want to take you through some real world examples of how to change your camera settings to get the right exposure. So I have my 35mm on right now and I want to take a photo with a shallow depth of field. So the first thing I'm going to do is change my aperture. And I'm gonna move it down to f1.4 because I wanna shoot with it wide open. But as you can see, my picture is totally overexposed right now. So the next thing I'm gonna do is bring my ISO down to 100 because we're outdoors in bright sunlight. So I'm gonna bring that all the way down to 100. And as you can see, we still don't have quite the right exposure. It's still a little bit bright. So the final thing I'm going to do is increase my shutter speed right here, just until I get the image well exposed. So just about there. For the second example, I want to show you what it would be like if you're going to be taking photos with, let's say, a kit lens, or you want to take images with a wider depth of field, so a higher aperture. So what I'm going to do is increase my aperture to about f5.6. And as you can see, that has underexposed my image. So the next thing I'm going to do is decrease my shutter speed to bring back some exposure. So something to keep in mind is that when it's on a tripod, it's okay, but normally when you're taking portraits, you're hand holding your camera. So you don't want your shutter speed to be too slow that you're gonna get motion blur in your images. So I'm gonna leave my shutter speed at 1/200 because I love shooting with lots of movement. So that's as slow as I personally like to go. So instead, what I'm gonna do to get the right exposure is to now bring up my ISO. So as I bring it up, there we've got our image nicely exposed. So far, we've shot in some pretty easy lighting conditions. So now I want to get into a harsh light situation and show you how to change your camera settings for this kind of trickier lighting. So for this photo, I want to shoot at about f2. I want a bit of depth of field, but I still want quite a sharp photo. The next thing I'm going to do is bring down my ISO all the way to 100, because again, we're in bright sunlight, so we've got plenty of light available. And the final thing I want to do is decrease my shutter speed until we get the right exposure. So actually I'll increase it because we've got a little bit of shade. So 1/3200 looks good here. Now that you've seen some step-by-step examples, the last thing I want to talk about is my personal thought process behind changing my camera settings to suit a particular style of photo and how you can think about this as well. As you saw from the example photos, aperture takes the most control over the creative style of your photo. Because of that reason, aperture is usually the setting I'll decide to change first when I'm doing portraits. If I'm going for a dreamy look to the photos, that means I want a shallow depth of field. So I'll choose to set my aperture to f1.2 or whatever the widest open my lens can go. Then I'll adjust the shutter speed and ISO until my image is correctly exposed. For another example, if I'm doing a fashion photo shoot and I need both the model and the outfit from head to toe in focus, I'll pick an aperture with a wider depth of field to be able to get all of that in focus. So I'll choose something like f4.5 or f5.6, and then again adjust the shutter speed and ISO until my photo is correctly exposed. If you're doing landscape photography, on the other hand, I think shutter speed will be more important for you. If you're taking photos of a waterfall, you might decide to choose your shutter speed first to choose the effect that you're after, and then adjust the rest of your settings to suit. That is all I have for today's video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, I have heaps of other photography tutorials on my channel. But thank you so much for watching. I make new videos every single week, so I'll see you all next time. Bye.